Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers, welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to see you. It's Friday. Hope you guys are ready for the weekend. I got Grammy's big 90th birthday party on Sunday. We have invited so many people. She's going to have the best time. We're going to jump into day 2 of testimony in the Robert Tellis trial. We're going to recap that for you. But first, before we get started, you know the drill. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, share it with your friends, and you can ring my bell if you want notifications of when I post new content. Click that little bell icon. Music fact of the day. The gospel choir on Madonna's hit song Like a Prayer and Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror are the same. That is from the Andre Crouch Choir. I'm just running some random footage from yesterday's testimony. It's just very time consuming to split it up person by person. It adds a couple of hours to what I do. So we're going to take the easy way out. It's Friday, right? Back on the stand was Detective Clifford Mogh. He was on the stand Wednesday at the end of the day. He's the one that put together the surveillance videos to a timeline. He was on cross when we picked up yesterday, and the defense asked if he was mainly focused on this 5.3-mile trip between the two men's homes, and also asked how many neighborhoods are between this, and the witness says hundreds. You said you saw the red Denali leave the neighborhood area. And the defense points out, we can't tell if that's a male or a female driving, but you kept saying he yesterday. The witness says that's correct. We can't tell, but he thinks it was a man. The defense points out we don't know where that red car was the day before the murder, prior to 9:10 a.m. when it's first seen on camera, or in the days after the homicide. The witness says there was surveillance set up on that car after the murder. The defense asked if he knew that Robert was under surveillance prior to the murder of Jeff. The witness doesn't know for sure. He does know there were Metro units involved in an investigation, but really doesn't know the details. The defense asked about the ring camera at Roberts and asked if there was any video from that day. The witness says no. He also added that other detectives canvassed Roberts' neighborhood for any kind of video, but nothing of value was found. He then moves on to the witness saying that there was a lighter spot on the plastic just below the windshield on the front passenger side. And the defense says the sun is reflecting off of that, isn't it? And the witness is like, don't think so. Did you receive information? There were 67 red Denalis in the Vegas area. And the witness says, actually, there was a lot more than that, over 100. One of those was listed as being registered to Robert's wife. So they narrowed down the list further to Yukons, then red Yukons. Again, Robert's wife was on the list as an owner of that kind of car. They narrowed it down to red Denalis. That's where they came up with the 67 number, and she's still on that list. The day before, the witness said that at one point you can see the license plate has been removed, and then later in surveillance, you can see it's back on. They go back and forth about this for a bit. The witness thinks that he saw what looked to be a commemorative license plate on the back of that car. And the witness points out that Robert had a commemorative license plate. But the defense kind of nails him down to, in this video, in this photo, you can't tell what kind of license plate that is. And the witness agrees. There was no redirect. The next witness is Stephanie Yagi, the medical examiner. They go through the photos from Jeff's autopsies. We're just going to focus on the fatal wounds. He had 13 wounds in all. The two that were the most serious, one was on the inside of the neck. That caused defects in the larynx and the carotid artery. The medical examiner explained that wound would make it difficult to breathe with the damage to the larynx, and also the carotid artery. That's the main artery that supplies blood to the brain. And the consequences of that injury would be lack of oxygen to the brain, which would ultimately end in death. The second fatal stab wound was to the torso. It was on the left side of his body, close to the rib cage. That affected the left lung, the heart, the sac around the heart, the right ventricle, and the aorta. The upper lobe of his lung was punctured. That would cause trouble breathing, the injury to the heart and to the aorta, bleeding in the chest cavity. That's your second fatal wound. There was another stab wound on the left side of his back that damaged the hemidiaphragm as well as the kidney. He had some scratching and bruising on his forehead, and on his right and left hand, he had defensive wounds. The cause of death, multiple force sharp injuries, and the manner, of course, homicide. On cross, the defense asked about the neck wound that severed the carotid artery and asked if that would have produced a substantial amount of blood. She says yes. He asked, "Can you tell if Jeff was in a standing or lying position when this wound was inflicted?" She said no. He asked, "Would you assume he was standing?" And the witness says, "I wouldn't assume that." He goes back to these injuries. He asked, "Would you expect it not to bleed?" And she said, "In some circumstances, the bleeding could be internal and not external." She said there was small amounts of internal bleeding at the time of autopsy. I will say later on in the day yesterday, when we saw the clothing that Jeff was wearing at the time he was killed, it's very clear where that blood went. The shirt absolutely saturated. You couldn't even tell what color it was. He asked about the deepest wound that Jeff sustained, and she said it was around 3 inches deep. And the defense asked, assuming it is a knife wound, is it safe to say that that blade would not be longer than 3 inches? The medical examiner said that's not safe to say. The depth of the wound, it doesn't assume the length of the blade. There are a lot of variables there that could explain why the wound wasn't deeper, even if the blade was longer. For instance, it could have hit something that stopped it. The defense asked if anything showed in the autopsy that something stopped the intrusion of the blade. She did not have any indication of that based on autopsy. He says, "We're limited to your examination and your conclusions, and there was little internal bleeding," and she said yes. He asked who was present. She said her staff and also a detective. He asked about the hands coming in a sealed bag to preserve evidence and points out she didn't recall the fingernails being processed. The medical examiner said that's not her job. Her forensic technicians do that and then hand the evidence to law enforcement. She did not personally remove the bags from Jeff's hands. On a redirect, the state points out that Jeff was in a state of decomposition when he was found and points out she did say that he had defensive injuries. The next witness is the one currently you're seeing on YouTube now, Jennifer Manning. She is a senior crime scene analyst with the Las Vegas Police Department. She attended Jeff's autopsy, and she explains they are there to collect evidence and take photographs. The first photo is showing the body bag seal is intact. They take that photo before anything is done to that body bag. There was nothing to indicate that body bag had been compromised. After they take those photos, they'll open the body bag and photograph the body as is before anything's touched. Once they do that, they collect the handbags off the body. They do hand swabs and the fingernail clippings. Those clippings are put into a small envelope that's sealed, and then it's put into a larger biological envelope. She explains that clothing is put on a clean sheet. She took a buccal swab, and also his clothing was saturated with blood as well as decomposition fluids. When that's the case, they have a biohazard drying closet. The clothing and the sheet his body was wrapped in is hung to dry. That process takes about 1 to 2 days. They show photos of Jeff's clothing as well as a set of keys that were found in his front pocket. They also showed these scaled arrows that marks areas of defect on the shirt. They showed a close-up. I counted 5 that were just straight down in a line. They also showed Jeff's shoes, very clean considering the injuries he sustained. Kind of makes me wonder if he wasn't lying down when these fatal wounds were delivered. On September 7th, she went to take photos of Robert at the police station. They showed the jury front, back, left, and right side photos. And he had a couple of injuries. That main one to the left ring finger, left middle finger, right middle finger, and she said there was a bruise to the right shoulder. She also took a buccal swab from Robert. She was told to bring that back to the crime scene unit as soon as she got it. Once they get back to the lab with evidence, they have what they call an evidence shoot. And then after that point, their job is finished. The state asks, who has access to that evidence shoot? And she said, the supervisor. On a cross. The defense asked what is sitting beside her in this bag. And she said, it's jeans from Robert. So he asked her to show the jury. The defense asked if she took the pants, which she did, but they were not processed. The defense asked about the photos of Robert and points out there's no injury seen on these photos other than the ring finger, and the witness agrees. One photo is shirtless and there are no injuries seen. And the defense says, you weren't asked about those photos today, were you? She said no. He asked how many photos she took of his bare torso or the rest of his body, and she said several. He asked if those photos were made available to the primary detective. Yes. When asked if she saw any scratches or wounds on Robert, she said just the bruise to the shoulder, and it was minor. The defense says, you can't say when that bruise happened. No. He asked if she was at Robert's home during the search warrant, and she wasn't. She said some members of her squad, and she names them off. He again asked the same question the state did, which is who has access to that evidence shoot once you put the evidence in there, and she said the supervisor. The next witness is the one on screen now on YouTube. Zach and his partner made me laugh so hard yesterday. They seem like they're the kind of people that would sit back and totally judge you, but not in a mean, malicious way, more in a funny way. He met Robert in 2020 and worked with him up until 2022. The witness is a real estate agent and worked with Robert in cases where a next of kin can't be located, and they help with the estate. The witness would be assigned a home, so they would walk through with Robert, Roberta, which is Robert's mistress, and a couple of more people. They would decide what would stay, what would go, the value of the homes, listing agreements would be signed, what needs to be fixed, things of that nature. The state says you get to see Robert literally walk. So, around how long would you get to watch him walk when you went to homes? The witness said anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour. He would see him 1 to 3 times a month at least. Of course, he became aware of Jeff's murder. He saw the video on the news, and that caught his attention because the suspect carried himself a lot like Robert. He tells his partner, Kristen, that looks a lot like Robert. The state asks, aside from the walk and this gait, which is very distinct, if you have a chance, look on YouTube for the 48 hours episode on this case. Around the 24-minute mark, maybe 25 minutes, they do a side-by-side of the suspect seen near Jeff's home and also a video of Robert that ironically was recorded when Jeff went to interview Robert as part of this first story. It is exactly the same. That is, to me, all the state needs to put up there. They could maybe send this jury back, but we got to have this fair trial. He told his partner, Kristen, and she agreed. Yeah, that looks like Robert. They were also aware of the articles Jeff had written about Robert and were very familiar with the whole situation. But at this point, even after feeling that could have been Robert, he does not call the police. A few days later, he sees a photograph of the suspect car that's put out in media, and then he said, that's Robert's car. He had personally seen Robert in that car. He explained they live close to each other, bumped into one another at a store, and when they were loading their cars, Robert was putting the waters he had bought in the back of that red Denali. So he tells his friend that has to be Robert's car. He said he didn't want to believe it, but it's his car. His partner said, you need to call. So he called and talked to someone for 15 or 20 minutes. At the end of the conversation, they told him a detective would want to talk to him, but he didn't hear back. And that following day, Robert's house was raided. A few weeks later, he talked to detectives. On a cross, the defense asked if they had a break in their business relationship. And he said, no, we had just finished revamping a house a couple of weeks before the murder. The defense says there was never any issue with the percentages charged to the state for these homes to be sold. The witness said about a year and a half before the murder, he and Robert did have a disagreement about the commission of a house, but because Tellis overspent based on his own personal research of the home's value, which he found on Zillow. The defense asked if Robert was just trying to save the heirs to the estate money. The witness says no, he actually did the opposite. He spent way too much money on this house. The witness did not agree with the value that Robert tried to put on it. And so Robert told the witness he needed to take a break in his commission on this. After that, he said they did 20 or 30 other houses. But the defense says there was a dispute. The witness says out of 40 houses, remember, he just said 20 or 30. So the defense says, oh, now it's 40. The witness said, don't nail me to the cross on the number. And the defense says, don't nail you to the cross, but you come in here saying the gate is Robert's. There's an objection for being argumentative. But the defense says you were interviewed on September 26th, and you talk about a friend with the detective who was on SWAT, who was part of the team that raided Robert's house. Yes. Did he tell you about the raid? Yes. I'm not sure where he was going with this. This seemed very personal to me, but he said, you decide to give testimony that hurts Robert. You talk to the police, there's an objection. The defense goes on, you gave a statement that could easily be seen as hurtful to Robert. The witness says, that's your interpretation. The defense says, are you saying it's not hurtful? The witness says, I'm saying what I said is a fact. He says he has no malice against Robert. And the defense says, but you had an issue with your commission. The witness says, that has nothing to do with anything. The defense says, well, then you talk to your friend on SWAT. The witness says that's fair, but it has nothing to do with the other. On redirect, the disagreement about evaluating that house, how long before Jeff was killed did that happen? The witness says about a year and a half. The state asked, after that issue, do you continue to do business with the public administrator's office? Yes. And the witness points out the public administrator's office does not have to give him these houses, but they chose to even after the commission disagreement. The defense gets back up. After the disagreement, your partner dropped you as a partner? He said no. He moved to another company, and that company did not want someone on that guy's team there. The witness put his own team together, and they continued doing the revamps. There was a jury question. Did he talk to his friend before or after he was interviewed by the detective? The witness asks which friend. The state jumps in because the judge says we can't elaborate. This is the question. We read it to you and answer if you can. But the state says, did you talk to your SWAT friend before or after you talked to the detective? He said it was before. The defense gets back up. Oh, you talked to your SWAT friend before you talked to the detective? Yes. The next witness, Kristen Riffle. She is the business partner of the previous witness. She said that she started working with Zach in 2020 when the market was really hot. As far as Robert, she worked on possibly over 30 homes together with him and Zach. They would meet with Robert at the homes. Robert would be there to assess what needed to be done inside the home. They go over learning about Jeff's murder, the videos that were released of the suspect. They followed Jeff's stories that he was writing about Robert and said to her partner, Zach, what if this is Robert? She said when they watched the video of the suspect, it raised their eyebrows. But she said, you don't want to assume and not be 100% sure. Zach called her again when the car photos were released and said that's Robert's car. He asked her what he should do, and she encouraged him to call Crime Stoppers. She was interviewed by detectives who came to their office. One thing I forgot to mention that the previous witness, Zach, mentioned is he also recognized Robert's shoes. In his words, he says, these are the cheap Nikes that you would buy at Marshall's. And that came up a couple of times. What originally made them suspicious this was Robert was the way he was walking, the height, and those shoes. So on cross, the defense says Jeff dies and you and Zach are talking about Robert in jest. And she's like, yep. Sometime later, there is the car photo that Zach recognized. He asked the witness, is that when the realization occurred for you he could be involved? She said it was a consideration to her when she saw the footage of the suspect walking, the height, the gait, and those shoes. The defense says it came to you when the car photo was released and not the video of him walking. She said, I didn't want to assume because I couldn't see his face. The state asked, you followed this case prior to today? And she said, yes, when it happened, but she said she's been really busy lately and hasn't kept up with the legal proceedings. The defense asked when she got a subpoena to come testify. She said about a week and a half ago. And when asked if she knew this trial was coming up, she said no. She said, I didn't think I'd have to show up. The defense asked if Robert wasn't there for the walkthroughs, and she said, actually, yes, he was, and he was very lovely to me. She said Zach and Robert would butt heads on prices, but that's a normal thing in their business. This is nothing out of the ordinary. Then the defense asked if Zach called Robert an a-hole, and she's like, no. The defense says, you were joking about it being him with Zach, and she said, we said, can you imagine if it were Robert? She said they were very much into the stories that Jeff was putting out about him and Roberta because they worked with him. On redirect, the state said, you said it was the gait and the height and the build that was familiar. Yes. When asked if there was an article of clothing that drew her attention, she said, Zach pointed it out. He's very observant. She said, in fact, today he told me I had a string on my outfit. Zach brought up the shoes to her, which both of them say are cheap Nikes from Marshalls. The next witness is Detective Edgar Nahum. He is with homicide. Before that, he was in gang investigations. He was doing a temporary assignment as a ride-along with homicide and was able to assist in homicide investigations. He was in the process of testing to be a homicide detective, so the ride-alongs were part of it. He helped execute that search warrant on Robert's home. He said they get the search warrant, divide up the rooms, and he was given an area to search. They're also told what items to look for during that search warrant, including the clothing seen on the video, the hat, the bag. The state asked if there were any Metro officers that just walked in the house, and he said, no, we discourage anybody not actively part of the search warrant from walking in the house. The state asked, did you see Detective Jappy? The witness said, I don't know who that is. So the state asked, did you see a tall redheaded guy? No. They ask if citizens can come in like real estate agents or anyone from Compass Realty. No. They show photos of that Ziploc bag that had cut up shoe in it that was found under the couch. There was also a whole shoe and then a partial shoe that had been cut up. That caught his attention. He recognized those to be pretty much like the ones that the suspect was seen in on video. To enable crime scene to take those shoes into inventory, he lifted up the couch. The analyst took possession and nobody else touched the shoes. On cross, the defense asked about reports filed in the case and asked if there was a report about this. Yes. He asked if it's important for these reports to be accurate. Of course, the witness says yes. He did not review it, by the way, prior to his testimony. The defense says if I said in this report there is a summary of the entire investigation and your name doesn't appear in this report as discovering the shoes, the pieces, or the Ziploc bag, would that surprise you? Because you're giving us testimony you found this stuff. He asked if the witness wrote any report about the items he found. No. You were asked if you saw any civilians or realtors there, but you were not there before the search warrant was executed or in the days before. No. On redirect, how do you spell your name? So he does. He asks his badge number. He gives it. The state asked, did you search that living room alone or with someone? He said with another investigator. The state says when they list the officers that are involved in the search warrant, they list the first initial, and then the state asks about his last name. The witness says, oh, my last name is misspelled in this report, but the badge number is correct. The state asks, who is the person who is said to have found the shoe? The witness says the investigator he was assisting. The defense gets back up and talks about the misspelling of the name and asked if it was a Detective Gilbert that initially found the shoe. The witness says he was behind the couch. The other detective was in the front. The witness shined his light and the Ziploc bag got his attention. He said they both saw the shoe at about the same time. They asked if they were wearing body cams. He said they are not required to. There was a jury question for this witness. Who reclined the chair to check under the couch? The witness said he did. Another jury question. While the team was searching the home, were the home surveillance cameras on and were those reviewed? The witness doesn't know. The next witness, Detective Milliken from Homicide, he was the scribe the day of the search warrant. He takes in the inventory, documents who it was collected by, and then does a return documenting what was seized. He names everyone he knew that was inside, and upon initial arrival there, Robert's family was inside. They show photos from inside the garage. There is a shelving unit with a plastic storage bin, and when he opened it, he sees a gray bag, much like the one the suspect was seen carrying the day of the murder, inside. There was a basketball and a football inside that bag. He says he calls crime scene to photograph and inventory that. On cross, this bag was found in the box. Was the basketball and the football that was inside that bag preserved? He says not to his knowledge. They show a photo of the empty bag and asked if there's sawdust in the bottom of that. The witness doesn't know. But the defense points out this looks like the bag the suspect was carrying, but there's a basketball and a football in it, and it's in a storage container. The witness agrees. The next witness, Detective John Hoffman, homicide detective, he was at the search warrant, and he was the one that found the cut-up straw hat. The state asked, can people just walk in and out of a search warrant? No. He said they have officers who stand outside to prevent people from coming in. The state asked, was there anyone from Compass Realty there that day? No. Did you see Detective Jappy there? No. But the witness does know who it is. The hat was in the garage in the bottom of a stand-up toolbox, and it was inside a plastic bag that was closed together. On cross, the defense points out there are 3 photos showing the hat from further away inside that toolbox and then 2 that get closer. He asked if he moved the bag before it was photographed, and the witness said yes, he did to see what was inside, and then he put it back before. The crime scene analyst took the photos. There were other detectives in the garage when the bag was found, but he found that on his own. So the defense asked, so in a sense, this bag was staged in the photograph. The witness said he wouldn't say that. When asked if the bag was processed for prints, he says no. On redirect, they talk about picking up the bag. Did you open the bag? No. When asked what was it that caught your attention, the witness said the fabric on the hat, it looks a lot like the one the suspect was wearing. That was it for yesterday's testimony. I encourage you guys to go watch the cross-exam of the 2 realtors. It was very different from any line of questioning I've seen this defense attorney do. I do think both the state and the defense are doing a really good job here. The defense doesn't have much to work with. This is a pretty slam dunk case for me, at least. It's just everything's there. The walk alone, side by side. It is a different gait for sure. The right leg seems to stay more stiff as he walks. His back sort of leans back when he's walking. It's very obvious it's the same person. I'm going to hopefully try to get today's summary out this evening. I've got a very busy weekend, so I want to put this week to bed as soon as I can. If you want to watch, we will be streaming live today for day 3. I think yesterday we ended with 18 witnesses having taken the stand. I believe the state has 20 witnesses. Of course, your lead investigator is going to be a while, but it looks like maybe next week we could get to the defense case. And as we know, Robert is expected to testify in his own defense. He's an attorney. It should be very interesting to watch. All right, you guys have a good rest of your day.